Welcome to the Political Orphans. My name is Nico and I am your in-house conservative. To my left, Rob Ambrose, our token lefty. And as always, we review the news. But our goal is different because we do it while keeping in mind that the left and the right can get along. And when we can't, you know what we do? We debate like grown adults. Because remember, common sense has no political affiliations. Today is different because we got a special guest. Today, we have the father of two daughters that decided to take a stand against gender ideology. You might have heard of him, Billboard Chris. What's going on, brother?
I'm doing well. I didn't really know Rob was a lefty. I saw he was a heretical liberal. I don't get to talk to lefties very often. We're probably going to get in
heretical, yeah.
You have to be careful with his emotions.
No.
He's a lefty. You have to be careful.
He's a lefty who works out. That's pretty unusual.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I demand a safe space here, guys.
No, not going to get it.
No, I am I guess. My whole life, I've been a liberal or progressive, but the last couple years, I'm sort of, I guess, having an existential crisis. It started with gender, and it's gone to a few other things that I realize just sort of opened my eyes about how sort of batshit crazy the left is these days. I'm sort of on a mission. I think it can still be reformed, but you know, it could be a futile effort, and I may end up over on the other side someday. But
it's a futile effort, I guarantee you. But
yeah, well, so
was it Winston Churchill who said, if you're not a lefty in your 20s, you don't have enough heart, and if you're not a conservative in your 30s, you don't have enough brains? This is the natural.
Yeah, it's funny. I said that quote to my girlfriend the other day. But maybe I'm just in that transition. I definitely, by no means am I trying to, I guess, reform the left, or it's a lost cause. The way the left is, there's no way. Like the zealots and the ideologues are so baked into everything that you couldn't reform it. You'd have to start over, start new, and that's kind of what I'm doing. But I don't know. It's a tough slog. It's a real tough slog. But one thing about this show, when me and Nico started talking, we kind of realized, when you actually get down to brass tacks, the media would have us believe that we are, just mortal enemies and we should hate each other. But when you actually discuss things in good faith, and if you're a common sense person, you realize there's actually a lot of common ground to be found. And that's sort of what this show is sort of all about, what we're trying to do. But thank you for being here, Chris. You're sort of, I guess, as me, as someone who speaks out about gender, that's really where I built my following. Sort of, I guess, like a personal hero to me. I really respect what you do in your work. And I think probably we'll start with that. So as we were doing our research, I realized I didn't really know how you came to be doing this. So I figured, if I didn't know that, then probably the audience would be interested in that as well. So maybe you should just kind of give us your origin story. Tell us, how you came to be involved in the gender debate and why it's so important to you.
Well, first and foremost, I'm a dad and I've got two girls, and this is a social contagion really affecting girls. Exactly. I see this as a cult. I understand how cults work. I first came across this subject in 2019. Mm-hmm. And I'd kind of been aware of, trans issues on the periphery for a long time, but I was just busy building my career as an investment guy back in the day. For 19 years, I was a finance guy. And I was just, going about my regular life, but not paying attention to all this stuff. And in 2019, I think I came across this term puberty blockers. Mm-hmm. And I said to myself, as a dad of two girls who at the time I think were 7 and 9, what the heck are puberty blockers? That does not sound very good. And of course, as soon as you do 2 seconds of research into this, you learn that they're exactly what they sound like. They are drugs being given to children to stop their bodies from going into puberty. And the average person out there, including most people on the left, because I've spoken with tens of thousands of people at this point, the average person out there instantly thinks that's totally insane. Why are we stopping the development of perfectly healthy children? Never has there been a clinical study or anything into this. You can't do an ethical one. But this whole thing stems from this idea that some children are born in the wrong body. What are you talking about? How can a child be born in the wrong body? This is cult speak. This is totally nuts. That is such an abusive message on its own, telling children that they were born wrong, that they're supposed to be something they're not. That's what the message is. It's a message of self-hatred. That's what it's affirming. Gender affirming care, which is one of the biggest misnomers in the world today, the only thing it's affirming is self-hatred. When we should be telling children, as I say a million times, and people are probably getting tired of me saying it, our children are perfect just as they are. No drugs or scalpels needed. That's the positive message. There's no right or wrong way to be a girl or a boy. That's the reality. And the funny thing about this is when I have these conversations out on the street, which I'll get into in a second, when I say something like that, everyone agrees with me. The most rabid leftist trans activist cannot disagree with the statement that there's no right or wrong way to be a girl or a boy. They will all agree with you when you say we shouldn't be putting our kids in some stereotypical box. But then in their next breath, they say, well, if a girl is more masculine, that must mean she's trans and we need to change her body to conform to the stereotypes of the opposite sex. There is a huge disconnect in logic here. And like all cults, they don't allow themselves to examine their own thoughts. They don't allow themselves to critically think about this subject, because if they were to question it at all, now they're losing their friend group. And they're getting in trouble with the people in their life, their family members, whoever, and they're getting cast out, as leftists love to do to people who don't conform to every single thought. And it's too much for them to confront. So they bury these doubts and they never examine them. And so I started learning all about this all throughout 2020. I was reading up on this every night, thinking, what the heck is this whole business of gender ideology? There must be something to it. It's so huge. It's being pushed by every government in the world, by all these international organizations, all these NGOs. And the more you read, the soon you understand the entirety of gender ideology is based on a lie. Every single last bit of it. And we need to annihilate it completely. But online, I felt the discourse was pretty toxic. It was mostly people just talking to people who are already in their own echo chambers. And it was a lot of complaining. And I don't think that's how you build a movement. And I don't think that's how you get most of the world on board. You have to offer a positive vision. And you have to offer hope. And you have to have calm, rational conversations with people who don't necessarily disagree with you. But back then, this was 2019, 2020, everyone was afraid to talk about this. People would whisper the word trans. No one wanted to even discuss it, because what the left was very successful in doing was conflating transgenderism with LGBT.
Yeah.
And those four letters, LGBT, they strike fear in the hearts of men, and they don't want to talk about it because then they get canceled. Cancel culture comes for them. They're a bigot. They're a racist. They're whatever. It's the tactic the left always uses. Just use names and smear tactics to silence people. But I'm a dad and I'm in my 40s. I'm 49 now. I don't care what people think of me. I don't care about the lies they tell about me. I know who I am and my family knows who I am. And honestly, my wife and kids, those are the only people's opinions that matter. Everyone else can say whatever they want. So I got tired of this. And in July of 2020, a woman in the UK put up a sign that said, I love J.K. Rowling. It lasted one day because some people on Twitter complained that it was hate speech. I was reading Harry Potter every night with my little one, who was 8 at that time. And for me, those are like the best memories of my entire life, is reading with my kids at bedtime. Mm-hmm. You have these great bonding moments. You're sharing this adventure together. It's the end of the night. Maybe they're just trying to stay awake and stop from going to bed. And that's when their inner thoughts from the day come out, the things they didn't tell you about that were going on at school or whatever. And as any parent can attest, these are just fantastic moments. So I saw this sign get taken down and I thought, what? You can't even say you love the world's greatest children's author? This is insane. So I put up a billboard, a big one in Vancouver, that said the same thing. It also lasted just a day because a Vancouver politician named Sarah Kirby Young said it was hate speech. And they pressured the sign company, who took it down. I then leveraged all the outrage online into a quick little fundraising campaign and put up billboards all throughout the US, culminating in one in Times Square at the end of September 2020. But then in Canada, there was nothing I could do. None of these sign companies would work with me. And although I don't think anyone else realized, I knew exactly what I was embarking on. I was embarking on a long, multi-year mission to raise awareness about this, to put a stop to it, because I knew when enough people learned about this that we would put a stop to it. So I did the only thing I could do, which was had some signs made. I wear them. It's easier than holding them. And I talk to people out on the street, busy downtown centers. I started traveling Canada. I started going to university campuses. When the borders opened, I started going to the States. And now I'm traveling all over the world, getting into all sorts of good trouble. And we're winning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry for my rant.
No. That's what you're here for. Yeah.
Thank you for the explanation. It's very interesting because it only makes sense to me that that's how it happened. But, I spent a lot of my time in the US, and we came down in October just before the election in the US. And there's been, ever since, we're in Alabama, so we're in a very Christian place. I'm a Christian, and one of the things that I've noticed is that there's been a cultural change ever since Trump became president again, or at least got elected as president. He's been going after that agenda from the get-go, and he's not scared to go after either. But I'm also Canadian, which I spend half of my time in Canada, and I'm looking at our choices, and I know you're a very political person just by looking at your posts on X. Are you disappointed by what you're seeing in Canada? Are you disappointed that our biggest ally to the south are completely are kind of swinging the pendulum back to the middle? And then you have guys like Pierre Poilievre, a so-called conservative that doesn't even have the balls to say that there are two sexes and sexes and gender are no different. Like, he won't even answer that question straight up. He plays the political game because he wants to avoid it. Is that something you find disappointing from a so-called conservative in Canada?
I've been calling out this Conservative Party since day one. They don't want to talk about any of the cultural issues, period. Pierre, for the longest time, he talks about inflation. He talks about the carbon tax. So we have a carbon tax on our energy in Canada. And yeah, it's ridiculous, and we need to get rid of it. It's an issue. It's a good issue to talk about. It's a little bit down the pecking order in terms of priorities as far as I'm concerned. But for the longest time, he's saying we need to have a carbon tax election. Like, that was his one issue: carbon tax, carbon tax, carbon tax. And yes, he talks about some other things, building more houses because of the housing crisis. He doesn't really acknowledge that's entirely because of mass immigration that we've had for years, and that we need to stop immigration almost completely for a while so that we can normalize. But he still wants to bring in 250,000 immigrants a year. That's what he wants to get down to. Of course, they'll miss those targets. If you look back through history, all these Western European countries, if you look at England, for example, they had targets to reduce immigration there too, and they always missed them. And now we see all the problems going on.
You mean miss them on the upside or the downside?
They always bring in more than I got you. But
yeah,
the gender ideology was one issue they didn't want to talk about. And I was at CPAC, I think it was 2023. So this is the big conservative conference in the States. I'd say Turning Point has probably surpassed it now.
Yeah.
In terms of relevance, but CPAC is still a big deal. And I was sitting in the 6th row when Trump gave his speech in 2023, I think it was. And it was the first time he mentioned, in this hour-and-a-half long speech, it was the first time he'd mentioned that he's going to stop the chemical castration of children, and he's going to get men out of women's sports. And in that 90-minute speech, that was by far the biggest applause he received. And he's remarked this in other speeches he gave. How, even when he talks about the border and stopping immigration, and then he talks about this issue, this is always the one that gets the biggest applause. This is what really fires people up. And we saw in this last election, based on data of people who voted, the swing voters, the number one issue affecting swing voters was transgenderism.
Yep.
And I was meeting with members of Congress probably back in, when was it? August 2022. I met with some. I've done some work with the Heritage Foundation, biggest conservative think tank. And they didn't want to talk about this child transition issue back then. It was only Alabama and Arkansas back then who had actually introduced legislation to stop this. I've been to the University of Alabama in Birmingham, by the way, having these conversations. And right away, a judge put a stay on it. So it's a legal battle that's still going on to this day. But most of the Republicans even then didn't want to talk about this. They were starting to become comfortable. Just 2.5 years ago, they were starting to become comfortable talking about the sports issue, because Leah Thomas is lapping women in the pool, and they can all see how insane that is. And it's easy to talk about. this issue of transitioning kids, childhood sex changes, people were more confused, and it requires more of a conversation to learn about it. And I think one of the big turning points was in August 2022, when I tweeted out these videos that Boston Children's Hospital had produced from their own gender clinic, where they're talking about phalloplasties, vaginoplasties. You have the director of the #1 ranked pediatric children's hospital in the country saying that things like a little girl trying to pee standing up is a sign she might be transgender, or a boy peeing sitting down, or trying on a sibling's clothing, or playing with the opposite gender toys. This is verbatim. These are a sign your child is transgender and can be treated. And they know seemingly from the womb they are transgender. We now had a Democrat politician, I tweeted it out just earlier this month. She says in the second trimester is when
I saw
these fetuses are transgender. That's when their gender identity is formed. This is totally nuts. But these people believe it. This is just one big cult. So anyway, exposing Boston Children's Hospital started this cascading effect where other conservatives started looking into these other children's hospitals. And pretty quickly, this became one of the #1, if not the #1, talked about issues all across conservative media. And we've just continued to educate the population since then, to the point now where this was the #1 issue for swing voters in the presidential election campaign. Yet to circle back to your original question, and I'm sorry I give these long answers, here in Canada,
fit in great right here.
Pierre Poilievre has mentioned puberty blockers one time. It was about a year ago at a press conference, because Danielle Smith, the premier of Alberta, said that she was going to stop puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones for kids under 16 years of age. So this was a breakthrough in Canada because no politician would even touch this. That's a half measure, doing it for under 16s. It's not good enough, but it's 100% better than nothing. And at a press conference, after about the 4th time he was asked, he offered his opinion that he thinks personally that children shouldn't get puberty blockers. That's the only time he's ever mentioned it, which is not good enough. And it's one reason we're seeing him really suffer in the polls right now. They had a commanding lead because of Trudeau's incompetence and the hatred for Trudeau ever since Trudeau resigned, and also because Trump is, with his 51st state rhetoric and the tariffs and all that, nothing unites a country like another country taking shots at it. The Liberals are resurgent again. And now, based on series of polls, the Conservatives aren't even in majority territory anymore. They might still get a majority, but if they don't get a majority, it's a disaster. So if they talked about this issue, they would win a lot more votes and they'd get a lot of these swing voters. But Canada is a mess and they just don't want to discuss it, which I think is extraordinarily, it's not just embarrassing, this is a child abuse scandal like nothing we've ever seen. This should transcend politics. They should be doing what I'm doing, which is educating Canadians about this issue. He could be making 5-minute videos every day, educating people about this issue. He could be giving the positive messages I get, which I know are overwhelmingly received by Canadians and people everywhere in the world. All parents know their girls are girls and their boys are boys. Forget about a few moms with borderline personality disorder who are pushing this on their own kids. Almost every parent understands. All the immigrant communities, all these demographics that traditionally vote leftist, they're all especially on board with this, but they don't want to talk about it. And Pierre says this is not a federal issue. He says it's a provincial issue. Well, they passed a federal bill called Bill C-4, which made it a crime to help your child feel comfortable with their sex, but it's fine to convince your girl that she's a boy.
That's great, man. There's so much good stuff in there that, I'm certainly not going to be able to address all of it, but just some of the things that you were saying is so bang on. Like, I don't understand, like as a lefty, as we were talking about at the beginning of the show, one of the things that makes me, tear my hair out. I had a full head of hair when the show started. Not literally, of course, but is I don't understand. It's political malpractice how these left-leaning parties have allowed the other side to just take the reins on this issue, because it's just such a common sense thing. It's funny because the actual if when you ask if you ask the question if people support trans rights, especially on the left, most people support it. But if you actually break it down and say, do you support men and women's sports? Do you support men and women's prison? Overwhelmingly, they do not. And so I don't understand why the left has just completely sort of disengaged. Well, I guess I do understand it. I'm a little less sure about why the right hasn't gone so hard on it. As you said, like when Trump did the speech, it was by far the biggest applause line. I think the trans activists will often say, I'm sure you hear it all the time, why do you care? It's only such a small percentage of the population, but it isn't, right? It affects all of us. Well, first of all, it directly affects the 50% of the population that are women who are losing out on their sports, men being placed in prisons, but it affects all of us to be forced to lie, to be forced to engage in a gaslighting campaign, because humans are psychology. We need some basic core truths to anchor ourselves, to tether ourselves to reality. And when we lose that, everything goes to shit. And I mean, that's kind of what you're seeing here now. So the next question I wanted to have, this one, actually, we've got a video. So this is actually the first time you came across my radar screen, because I only really started to talk about it probably two to 3 years ago. And it was a clip you probably will remember. Well, I'm sure you remember. I believe you were at a rally in Vancouver, and I think you were physically assaulted by a trans activist. The one who was yelling in your face, fuck you. I
remember it. A million views. I remember.
Yeah.
And the police officer was smiling as I was getting assaulted.
Yeah, and so exactly, that's exactly what I wanted to discuss. So just in case our audience is not quite sure, Nico, are you able to play that clip?
Yep.
And then so we're just gonna play it for the audience.
Why do you think they're getting that kind of representation? I mean, it's clearly was aggressive, violent assault.
You suck. Fuck you. Fuck you. You're not wanted. Fuck you. You're a fucking idiot. You're a fucking.
I don't know
idiot.
what to say.
Fuck
I guess
you.
these police officers
Fuck
are mostly
you.
indoctrinated as well. They're afraid of the mob.
Because you're a fucking idiot.
I think they're afraid that if they do anything to actually keep law and order, that they'll end up being on the end of this verbal abuse. So it's just cowardice from everybody all around.
People probably want to know, how do you keep your composure?
Fuck you!
What's that?
How do you keep your composure?
Fuck you! 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 Hey! Get your fucking ass up there! You son of my phone, my purse, my dog.
Just utterly insane. And I as I watched it, I think, what a perfect microcosm of exactly what this ideology is all about. Someone just calmly standing there, bringing up a concern they have, and a deranged lunatic screaming in his face, getting violent. And then you've got, it doesn't show it in that clip, but then you've got the cops after that smiling and laughing and making a joke. And I don't believe that guy was that guy even charged?
No.
Yeah, no, I didn't think so. So I guess the question I was going to ask is, how common is that kind of reaction to your activism? And when I say reaction, I mean both ways. One, the violence from the trans community or trans activists, and two, the indifference by the police when you are faced with that kind of what can only be described as criminal assault.
Yeah, so let me put that in a little context, what was going on there. I've been there almost, at that point, I'd probably been there 40 minutes, something like that. This was March 31st, 2023, which is Transgender Day of Visibility, because they're not visible enough. They need another day.
Of course.
And, I don't go to a lot of these things, but I do go to some because I think it's important to push back. I don't appreciate that we have child abuse movements being celebrated on our streets. And I think there needs to be some pushback, peacefully, rationally, having conversations like I do. So I went to this rally. It was in some park in East Vancouver. And I hadn't been there 30 seconds and I was already assaulted. My nose was bleeding because someone had hit my sign up into my face, which cut my nose a little bit. And so it was already bedlam. A couple of friends of mine were there. A journalist I know had come, Dan Dix. He was who was interviewing me there. And so I did what you do in these situations, which was I called the police. And that blonde police officer who in that video, if you slow it down and zoom in on her, you can see she's smiling ear to ear during that entire assault, including as I'm falling down there. She was the first officer to show up. So she's the investigating officer. And I'm told over the next hour that she's the only one I can talk to about any of these problems. As soon as she showed up, I knew I had a problem. She was rolling her eyes. She rolled down her window. What's going on? Of course, I have my signs on. My sign says children cannot consent to puberty blockers. And I knew right away I had a problem. And she even said at one point, maybe I scratched myself. Maybe I just cut my own nose.
Insane.
And anyway, so she's like a trans activist in uniform. That's what she is.
Mm-hmm.
And more police arrived over the next hour. At that point, there's probably 25 police officers there. And I'm trying to give this interview to Dan Dix, and they're screaming at me from behind. So I moved away. I tried a second time. They did it again. I moved away. So that's the third time where that video starts. I'm talking to Dan, and then they all come around me. So I've got one guy screaming in my right ear. You can't really see it in the video, but this other guy's screaming in my left ear. And they're getting closer, and they're getting louder, and I can't really hear much. I can't even hear Dan what he's saying at one point there. And then one of those screams really hurt because it was close. And it's too much. I'm technically already being assaulted. This is already an assault going on that police are doing nothing about. They should be doing a little bit of crowd control, but you're not allowed to walk up to someone and scream in their ear. And one of those screams hurt a little bit. So I just put my hand up for a little space. And then that's when he punched a couple times. He pulled. He actually grabbed my shirt and pulled. And the other guy, you can't tell, but the other guy's pushing me at the same time from behind. So I took a little bit of a tumble. Police did nothing. No arrests. And yeah, so that's when a lot of people were introduced to me because that video went very viral. I think I picked up 80,000 followers over the next day.
Yeah, I was one.
So I'd like to thank them very much for helping to get my message out there. But to answer your question, this has happened many times, not like that exactly, but I've had my arm broken in Montreal. I got attacked by Antifa. 6 guys, premeditated attack. Ripped off my signs. I didn't know they were coming until I was punched in the face. Stomped on my body cam in the middle of the road, which kind of irked me because I had great footage on it from earlier in the day. I had so many great conversations that day. And I also wanted to get them on video, so I pulled out my phone to film, and I have the last minute of that attack on camera. But a guy picked up a traffic cone, which he swung at my head 4 times, which I blocked each time with my left forearm, but there's no protection for your ulna there, and the base on those traffic cones is thick. Yeah. So it snapped my ulna. But again, that's fine. I don't care. Whatever. It's just a broken bone. And what's happening to kids is so much worse. Honestly, they're just helping my cause. So I don't go out there to get assaulted, of course. I've had tens of thousands of conversations, and normally I'm getting nothing but support. But there have been a lot of these incidents. I was attacked on December 31st, 2.5 months ago in Vancouver again. That was one of the more violent ones. I actually had to throw a few punches in response because you do have to defend yourself a little bit.
At some point, yeah, for sure.
But my practice is not to respond, because another time I got sucker punched from behind in Vancouver. I stopped the man from running away with a single push. I pushed him as he was running away. He fell down. I then walked away to de-escalate, waited for police to arrive. They arrested me. But then they released me because they reviewed the CCTV footage and the man admitted to sucker punching me. So I thought all is good because we are allowed to do citizens arrests in Canada. But what happened there, that was December of 2020. In the beginning of March 2021, I get a phone call from the Vancouver police saying they want me to come in and give a statement because they were looking now at charging me with assault causing bodily harm.
Oh, man.
All I'm going to say is next time you're in Montreal, let me know. I'm a martial artist by trade. I'm about 235 pounds. We'll grab some guys. We'll just stand around you.
Sure.
We won't do anything.
I did go back after that.
We'll build a wall.
Yeah.
I went back once after that and held a little rally on the street. But yeah, Montreal has a large component of Antifa, which I learned.
Yes.
It was also 7 p.m. on a Friday night. It was during COVID. There was a curfew starting at 8 p.m. So I was walking along. It's where Concordia University is. What's that street called? I forget.
Not St. Catharines?
St. Catharines.
No.
Yes.
Concordia?
Anyway, it doesn't matter. It's the busiest pedestrian street anyway. And there were lots of people around, and a bunch of people had lined up outside the liquor store, and this young woman stopped me to ask what am I doing? And she didn't like me at all, as many young women don't, because
Yep.
liberal feminism has
Oh yeah.
really affected them, and they all think I'm the devil. But she went into the liquor store and reported me to the manager, who came out and said he would call the police if I didn't leave. Well, I'm standing on a public street. I'm not going to leave. And I actually think he called his buddies, because Antifa showed up about 5 minutes later. The police did not. So I think he called his Antifa buddies and they came and did that. But that was a surreal moment, because they had a curfew at 8 p.m. And so then I went to the hospital to get my arm fixed up. And I couldn't get a taxi. No taxis would come to the hospital. So I ended up walking 1.5 miles in a snowstorm back to my car at McGill. And it's the most surreal moment, because I'm in the middle of Montreal, this beautiful, magnificent city, and there's not a soul. And I don't even have my jacket, because it had been, a guy had brought a mustard bottle and he'd squirted me with mustard. So someone was cleaning it for me. And I couldn't even fit my arm into my shirt sleeve because it had the big cast on it. And so my shirt's kind of open because my arm's in my shirt, and I'm walking in a snowstorm. It's just a surreal moment. I'll never forget it. And then I went back to my hotel and ate my poutine with my bare hands from my right hand that I'd bought earlier in the day. This incredibly 10,000 calorie thing of poutine. But
Yeah, of course.
that was fun. And I've had a lot of things like that. It's not all that severe, but especially in Canada, I tend to get more violence up here. But
That's
it is
interesting.
what it is. This is a war to protect our kids. And sometimes in war, you got to go in a battle.
Bingo. Got it. Exactly.
One of the things I find interesting about what you're saying, and I'm not surprised because I'm used to violence too, but unfortunately for them, people don't tend to try anything on me. For some reason, I guess I'm scary, so people tend to leave me alone. But one of the things that I've noticed, and I wonder, because I'm going to back up on the question that Rob asked, is it mostly men do you see that feel the need or that has the, I don't want to say courage because it's definitely not courage, but that have the audacity to attack you? Is it mostly men, or women do it too? Because right now I saw 2 dudes in dresses. Those are not women, obviously. Those are dudes in dresses. And the Antifa that you're talking about, I got a feeling that was a dude. So is it mostly guys that attack you?
5 or 6 of them, and there was one woman there too. But yeah, the attacks obviously are going to be mostly men. I mean, not many women are going to attack me. They have different means of doing that. Typically, and I can, I've been out on the street for thousands of hours. I can see it coming 100 yards away. I know who's going to have a problem with me. If there's colored hair, they're always going to have a problem with me. But the tactic with women is they'll wait until they walk past me, and then they'll say something and flip me off and keep walking. Almost every time. It's so predictable. And virtually every man does not have a problem with me. I get almost 100% support from men. The ones who usually have a problem with me are gay, to be honest with you. There's a split in the gay community. A lot of them have a huge problem with me. The man who attacked me December 31st was gay. The man who sucker punched me on the street before was gay. I've had other assaults from gay men. But of course, they don't all agree with this. And the gay community is not a monolith. So there's a huge split. But I think a lot of them see this and they see it as though trans kids, and I don't like that expression. These are just children. No such thing as a transgender child. But they think people like me are bullying them, that they're trying to erase their existence. And I think they project their own issues as a child onto these kids because they didn't fit in and maybe they were bullied. And now they see the same thing going on with these kids. But they have this blind spot where they don't realize that a lot of these kids who today say that they're trans, a lot of them would grow up to be gay. And this is not just me saying this. This is evidenced by every single study that has ever been done on the subject of gender dysphoria. I don't like that term either. These kids today don't have gender dysphoria. They have distress of other sorts, and they're autistic, and there's abuse and trauma and sexual abuse and all sorts of things. But if you look at all the studies that were done before they started drugging these kids with puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones, back when this affected maybe 1 out of 30,000, you look at the most recent study, 139 boys that they followed from a very young age all the way into their 20s. 87.8% of them outgrew their gender dysphoria. It desisted when they went through puberty. Puberty is the cure. Now we blocked the cure.
And they're blocking
And a
it.
majority of
Crazy.
those kids in that study, it was 63.6% grew up to be gay. And all these studies have similar results. So
It's conversion therapy, right?
That's what
It's
it is.
medical conversion therapy. There's no other way to call it.
it's the most homophobic movement in the history of the Western world.
100%.
For sure. So sometimes I'll go into these communities because that's where we need to have the conversation. Although, you know, you have to have your head on a swivel because it's going to get a little crazy there pretty much every time.
The reason I'm asking the question, because I read the book by Abigail Schreier, Irreversible Damage, and that kind of changed my whole perspective on this whole thing. That kind of blew my mind because I'm expecting my first child right now, so I'm not a father. And I've never realized, because it's not the message that we're sent on social media, for example. We're always talking about dudes with beards and dresses trying to get into women's bathroom, yet it's really young girls and teenage girls that are the most at risk from this. And it's not talked enough, if you ask me. But the question I have for you is about these men, because I see that there's a big lack of masculinity. There's a big lack of fatherhood, like real, not because they're not present, like real fathers that are there to raise their children. And as a father, do you think that guys like an Andrew Tate, for example, is the symptom? Is it one of the problems? Is it something that we need to look at to try to understand what's really happening? Because as much as women are being praised upon on that movement, because to me, it's predators. They're sexual predators that have a massive psychological problem, and they're just trying to get kids involved in their movement. That's how I see it. But at the same time, it seems like, it's always up to men to step up to the plate, just like you're doing, and say, enough, this needs to fucking stop, enough. But we're not seeing enough men doing it yet. I don't think there's a lot of those strong men left. And I think our boys are looking at the wrong type of men, like the Andrew Tates of this world. So what do you think is going on right now if you look at it from a male's perspective?
Yeah, I first started hearing about Andrew Tate a couple of years ago because some leftists at university campuses would say, "Oh, are you like Andrew Tate?" Why? Because I'm white and shave my head? I didn't even know who he was.
We all look the same.
Yeah, we all have great haircuts. But as soon as I started researching this guy, I mean, he's just total despicable giant loser, to say the least. I think most young boys are not on board with Andrew Tate. This is, of course, there are some, but he's not anything new or anything special. There have been Andrew Tates all throughout history. It's just now with social media, they're able to amass a following. And I think, especially online, it's not so much in the real world. I don't think we always get a proper picture of the world through Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
You've got some of these rather dishonest and fake conservatives praising Andrew Tate. I mean, this isn't about his legal cases. I don't care about his legal cases. All you have to do is listen to him for 10 minutes. Listen to his own words. It's hours and hours, hundreds of hours of all this nonsense and totally abusive garbage that he spews. So are some people falling for it? Sure, but I don't think this is anything new. To answer the broader question about masculinity, I think, cancel culture and this push in schools certainly has tried to suppress masculinity, natural masculinity, this effort to make boys feel bad for their natural masculinity. I think that's waning now. I think it's on the downturn, and I think the boys are doing better because, especially white boys, we're taught that we're at the top of the oppression pyramid. And this is pushed by all of these school districts who are all run by leftist school boards, and all the teachers' unions are literally run by communists pushing this crap into our schools and trying to indoctrinate our kids. But you can't take away natural instinct. Mm-hmm. You're never going to get rid of instinct. when you look at babies, for example, when they come out of the womb, you can set a baby down on a woman's chest and it'll wriggle its way over to start feeding all on its own. No one has to teach babies this. I've got some cats. I've got 2 girls. We have 3 cats now, 2 kittens. They try to bury their food. Even when they're done eating and it's still sitting on their plate and it's in your kitchen floor, they try to bury it by pawing at it. No one taught them that. It's instinct. When turtles come out of their shells and they burrow their way out of the sand, there's instinct driving them towards the ocean. And we have instinct too. And this idea that gender is a social construct, there are 2 groups in the world who push that: trans activists and feminists. And feminists aren't going to like that I'm saying this, but these things are linked. 95% of the abuse I get on the street comes from these young, white, liberal feminists. And I know there are radical feminists online, they call themselves, talking against this. They are such a minority in the whole of people who call themselves feminists that it's really in universities, that's where these kids are getting indoctrinated, and it's primarily the girls. This is not reaching the boys. So I don't really think we have a masculinity crisis. I think boys have been taught that they need to suppress it, but I think that's waning. I don't think most kids are looking up to Andrew Tate. Most of these young boys think he's a douchebag, to be honest with you. And I'm not that worried about it, but we do have to give people means to speak out about these issues. And I think people not so much are lacking masculinity. I think they just don't know what to do and they don't know how to talk about it. So part of what I do is try to give people the words so that they know how to talk about it, because when they know how, they're more likely to do it.
Maybe hold on, Rob. Maybe I misspoke my question. What I'm trying to get as an answer, to get answered, is: do you think it's up to men to stand up? Because
100%.
you look at the issue with feminism, it's men that just let it happen, and we didn't say anything. The same thing for the LGBTQ movement. It's men that just let it happen and just said, "Not my problem." Exactly what you were saying at the beginning, right? Not my problem. But then men, as you're saying, men don't necessarily know what it is to be masculine anymore. They try to do it by instinct, but only a masculine man can teach a boy how to become a masculine man. A woman can't do that job. But is the answer to what we're seeing right now masculinity? Is it up to men to stand up and say, enough, this needs to stop?
Yes, it absolutely is. But the problem is how do you do that? So it's not like in the old days where if this was happening 100 years ago, this would have lasted 1 week.
Oh, yeah.
Because nature's law would have taken care of all these child abusers. You know what I'm saying.
Oh, yes.
At any point in history of mankind, we would never have allowed this to continue. But now, if you employ nature's law, you're going to end up in prison for the rest of your life. So how do we do this? We do this by educating. We do this by building awareness across the world. Now, most people aren't in a position in life where they can just do that because they're working. They're providing for their family. That is masculinity, is providing for your family, taking care of your nuclear family, taking care of your kids, taking care of your wife. And what we see with school boards, for example, when people go to speak at school boards, this is a very powerful thing people can do. These videos go viral, you get millions of views. But it's often a lot of women involved in these movements. Naturally, some of them have more time because some of them are homemakers, which is a glorious profession, which should never be looked down upon. There's nothing more important than taking care of our families. Mm-hmm. That's kind of why we exist, is to have families, as far as I'm concerned. But you're naturally going to see more women involved in some of this pushback at the grassroots level because they have time, and women like to work together and talk about all these issues more. Men are more like, let's just get this the hell out of here. But you have groups like Moms for Liberty, for example, 130,000 moms all across the country. There are some dads and uncles and grandpas in there too. But we're never going to change that dynamic. Men tend to donate more, I think, because they can, and that helps them to feel involved. But I disagree that men aren't involved. I think they are. I think we're seeing a lot of pushback from men. I mean, we're seeing it in the White House right now. We're seeing it from J.D. Vance. We're seeing it from President Trump. We're seeing it from people like Vivek Ramaswamy and a lot of these conservatives who are speaking up. And I think we're doing a fantastic job putting a stop to this, not just in the US, but all across the world. The question is just, how do we fight back? Because we're not going to war. if we had 100,000 bad people come into our shores to harm our kids, we would have 1 million parents there to greet them, men. We would have dads there, and we would bomb them out of existence. But this is a different type of war. This is an information war, and you have to handle it differently. And I think we just need to find other people who are interested in fighting this war, and when we do, we get more effective. But we're still kind of forming that loosely built army.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. Just some of the things you're just saying there, I completely agree with. I feel like, the GC movement is definitely sort of an interesting beast because it has so many people from so many different walks, and many of us will come at it from different places, and that obviously can lead to conflict. And I feel like I 100% agree with you that it isn't necessarily that feminism is the cause of transgenderism, but I do believe in ideology that, made the claim and convinced a lot of people that there was no differences whatsoever between men and women, and the only ones that we have are socially constructed. That just laid, whatever the intention there, that laid just such fertile ground for another ideology to come in and claim that men can become women. Because once you make that step, that we're all basically the same, in some ways, it's almost an inevitable offshoot. And
it's feminist studies in university pushing this. It's Judith Butler down in Berkeley forming all these theories that our gender is just a feeling, that we're all performing our gender, that we're all basically wearing drag based on stereotypes. And that's all across all these universities. So there's a direction
exactly
these days.
And I'm glad that you sort of brought that up and we're able to get on that topic, just because I feel like, of course we're all pulling in the direction to get rid of this ideology now while it's directly harming kids. But in the big long term, in the bigger picture, how can we ever hope to prevent something like this again if we're not honest with ourselves about where the cause? And I'm not saying it is just one thing, something this complex.
That's right.
There's a lot of blame to go around, but we cannot ignore the fact that there is, I think a lot of us as a society, we need to take a good hard look in the mirror about how we got to this point and what went wrong. And I'm glad that you had brought that up, because I think it sort of gives me opportunity to bring that aspect up for it. With regards to what we're just talking about, masculinity, in some ways you kind of answered the question I was gonna ask. But like in my mind, I can sort of draw a direct correlation between the demonization of masculinity that has been going on for the last 20 years and the rise of gender ideology. And I kind of wanted to get your thoughts on that. And the other part to it was, what can we as men do to end this, for those of us that can't go out there with a billboard all over the world? And I guess you had just kind of answered that. So just to whatever you wanted to add to that.
This is always the question. People say, Chris, what can I do? I get, thousands of emails and people pouring out their life stories and they don't know what to do. And it's a tough one because we all just have to do what we can. We all have different skills. We all have different passions. So I tell people, well, first of all, you need to fight this in a way that you kind of enjoy fighting it, because if you're not having fun, you're not going to do it. If it's just a chore, you're not going to do it much. So
do you enjoy
honestly, I like what I do. I'm out on the street talking to people. Yeah, all hell breaks loose sometimes, but I actually really enjoy it. And I know I look ridiculous and all that, but it's incredible how much respect I get. I still am surprised by it, because people see the sign and they know this is a touchy issue to talk about because of media and everything. But almost everyone agrees. So they just respect that the message is getting out there. But people can go to their school board meetings. They can get educated about this and talk with their school principal. They can talk with their teacher. They can go to town halls. They just need to do whatever they can do. Support the other people who are fighting this. That's extremely important. I have support from all over the world now. It's still difficult, though, to, make ends meet and everything. No one likes asking for help like that. I don't certainly like it, but that's one way to help. But the truth is that if you look at any major civil rights movement throughout history, and this is really like a civil rights movement, the left considers this a civil rights movement to sterilize kids. But this is really a civil rights movement to protect children. It is a violation of their human right to be sterilizing and maiming children. And for those who say that's not happening to kids, it absolutely is. You can look up a Reuters article from a couple years ago. You can look up Do No Harm. This is a nonprofit group of doctors who have published a database on this. And based on insurance data that does not include private pay, does not include Kaiser Permanente, which is huge, does not include Veterans Affairs, does not include donor funds, we know that about 1,000 girls, not including all these other people, this is probably about half, about 1,000 girls a year right now are getting double mastectomies. We're talking about children. And they're doing this on kids as young as 12 years old. The range, it was up to about 170 kids under 12 and a half had had double mastectomies in the United States. So that's worse in the US than anywhere else in the world. But I heard recently from someone who used to work for Trans Health BC in British Columbia, where I'm at, that a 12-year-old girl had a double mastectomy at the BC Children's Hospital. And I know for sure they're doing this to 14-year-olds. So it doesn't really, it's totally insane. 12, 13, 14, 15, totally nuts. Because we haven't gotten into this yet, but these kids overwhelmingly have autism, have suffered abuse or sexual abuse. Dr. Quentin Van Meter, the former president of the American College of Pediatricians, estimates 60% of these kids have been sexually abused. At the Tavistock in England, the number one gender clinic in the UK, the only one, it was the biggest one in the world. It's shut down now. But out of their own statistics, out of 1,069 children to be exact, 35% they estimated had moderate to severe autism. I was just hanging out with the lawyers of Campbell Miller Payne in Dallas, Texas a week or two ago. They have 13 lawsuits now. They're representing these kids. These are 4 dads who all left their law firms just to sue for these kids. They're looking at another 150 cases. And in virtually every one, they say these children have autism. Yet no one's looking into this. And the autistic societies are providing pipelines to these children's hospitals.
It's crazy,
literally
isn't it?
Working with the children's hospitals, gender clinics.
The way I see it is autistic kids, if you know anything about them, are going to be uniquely susceptible to the message that they're born in the wrong body, that there's something fundamentally wrong with their body. And I don't use the word evil a lot, but I don't see any other way you could describe this ideology. It's going after not just the most vulnerable kids, but attacking them specifically in the way that they are most vulnerable.
That's right. And we don't know why there's this huge uptick in autism, but there is. And these are the kids who are ending up in these gender clinics. And it's not just autism. It's not just sexual abuse. According to the Gender Identity Development Service, part of the National Health Service in England, their own data showed that 70% of the children at the gender clinic had 5 or more coexisting mental health issues: depression, trauma, anxiety, borderline personality disorder, abuse,
and they don't treat that,
autism, etc. So is their problem gender, or is it all these other things? Why are kids in foster care way overrepresented in gender clinics? Because they're having a tough time in life.
I didn't know that,
obviously.
Actually.
So it's all the struggling kids. Those are the kids ending up at these gender clinics. It's the kids who are suffering from obesity as well. They're not having a great time because they're obese and they're being made fun of and they don't have as many friends. It's the kids who would grow up to be gay, who also feel like they're not fitting in. And they go to the Gender and Sexuality Alliance Club at their high school. Mm-hmm. And they get indoctrinated into this trans cult, which is what it is. And now they're getting love bombed, like in any cult. Whereas they weren't fitting in. Now they're getting all this attention and support. And then they announce on social media that, guess what, everybody? I'm trans. Boom, 10,000 likes, 1,000 loving comments.
Again and again and again. It's exactly how it goes.
It's always how it goes. This is a social contagion. And throughout history, girls are more prone to these social contagions. And this is just the latest one. And this isn't complicated, guys. This is really easy. So I was going to say with civil rights movements, the fact of the matter is it's normally a small amount of individuals who create enormous change. If you look at the independence of India, for example, it was Mahatma Gandhi with some loyal friends who would stand there and not react to violence. And it was actually the British police beating them up that was filmed one time that went viral back in those days all across the world on media. that really was kind of like the final nail in the coffin of the British colonialism in India, because people were so outraged by the treatment of them that helped to win them independence. If we look at Martin Luther King, the original real civil rights movement in the United States, again, it was nonviolence. It was a relative handful of individuals creating mass amounts of awareness. So we just have to do all we can. And especially in the age of the internet, my gosh, if you just tell the truth and you're not extreme about it and you're reasonable and you're not swearing all the time and you're trying to reach the normies and you're not arguing with the crazy leftists. And I'm sorry, I know you're from the left, but this is coming from the left.
Don't worry. Don't
it's
worry.
the 10% of the extremists on the left.
Mm-hmm.
Just present the facts, get educated about it, talk about it rationally, and you'll educate people. And pretty soon, because you've got the internet now you're going to be reaching millions. It's really not that hard. If I can do it, anybody can do it. I'm just having normal conversations. So we all just have to do whatever we can, and we have to stop being afraid of cancel culture. I understand some people are in jobs where they're going to get in trouble if they do this. So, they have to be smart because they got to take care of their family first. But not everyone's in those positions. And everyone in Canada, you know what? We do still have a voice. A lot of people say we can't speak. Well, I say whatever I want, wherever I want, in defiance of what the government wants, all across Canada, and nothing happens to me.
One of the things that I never hear spoken about, and to me, I'm a big proponent of accountability. If there's not one thing I see as a problem in society is that we don't take accountability for our actions whatsoever. And one of the things that I'm hearing you speak right now, you're speaking about how so many of those kids are affected by autism, or they have other psychological issues that are not addressed. Do you think that the parents of trans individuals, like the parents that let their kids get operated on, that let their kids get puberty blockers, that allow their kids to be further traumatized without addressing the real issues, should be held accountable for their actions? Because it's not the kid's fault. I know that for a fact. It's not the kid's fault. It's indoctrination. And often it comes from the parent too. So do you think they should be held accountable for their actions?
This is there's not one answer to this question. In some cases, these parents are being coerced. In many cases, they are. In many cases, it's the parents pushing this on the kid. Almost always the moms. There's an old study. It was a very small study, but it showed that 52% of the mothers of boys with gender dysphoria had borderline personality disorder themselves, compared to just 6% of the population. That same sort of thing is absolutely happening today. It's these cluster B mothers who, I don't know, having a so-called trans kid is like an accessory these days for some leftists, something to be celebrated, and it's bringing them attention. It's Munchausen's by proxy. So we're not in a state where we're going to be prosecuting parents for sure right now. I mean, by that rationale, we should be prosecuting every single social worker and counselor and psychotherapist. All these industries are pushing this, all these teachers. I do think we need to prosecute the doctors, and they are having civil cases brought against them. But you can't prosecute them when it's not a criminal offense. So we need to change laws, and we need to make this a criminal offense, because right now it isn't. Right now it's the opposite. It's even criminal offense not to transition your child in some jurisdictions. Now, good luck prosecuting anyone on that. These laws are really written just to silence people and to scare people, and it works. But let me give you a real life example. I ran into a girl called Clementine, a young woman. She's 19 or 20 now. I ran into her at UCLA in California in October. I'd been there 2 minutes. I'd just set up my tripod with my phone on it, filming. And she walked up and she told me her name's Clementine. She's a detransitioner. And what happened with her is, at the age of 7, she'd suffered sexual abuse. I don't know how long that went on for, but it wasn't just a one-time thing. And she wasn't looking forward to growing into being a woman. That's pretty understandable. She was sexually abused as a child. So she was seeing a counselor at school who, because she didn't want to really be a woman, wasn't looking forward to it. The counselor decided, well, she must be trans. So the counselor contacts the parents. What do the parents do? They do what most parents do who aren't fully, involved in this whole discussion like we are. They don't know anything about it. They took her to the gender clinic at the Children's Hospital of Los Angeles. Normal thing to do, where they met their doctor, Johanna Olsen Kennedy, who is one of the worst individuals in the world for this. She's running the busiest gender clinic in the United States at CHLA. On the first appointment, she separated Clementine from her parents. She's 12 years old. In 1.5 hour appointment, she prescribed puberty blockers to Clementine. She knows nothing about her. I've known you longer than she knew Clementine. And we just met today. And I know nothing about you guys, really, other than your excellent haircuts. But she prescribed puberty blockers in one appointment. She told the parents in that same appointment, separately, that they could have a dead daughter or a live son. The only way you can justify this child abuse, the only way you can justify sterilizing kids, cutting off their body parts, is to say they're going to die if you don't do it.
It's crazy.
So they started her on puberty blockers at 12. Then she had a follow-up appointment at 13. And Johanna Olsen Kennedy said, what's going on at school? Are the boys going through puberty? Yes, they are. Well, you're going to fall behind if you don't go through male puberty, which she can't do. So you'd better take testosterone. It wasn't Clementine even requesting it. It was pushed onto her, the testosterone, by Johanna Olsen Kennedy, the doctor. At 14, she pushed her into getting a double mastectomy because she said we have better results when we do them young. And Scott Mosser, the surgeon up in San Francisco, did this surgery. He met Clementine for the first time the morning of the surgery. They know nothing about these kids. The testosterone caused psychosis. She went off it at 17. She officially detransitioned at the age of 19. I mean, you can't really detransition. I know we use that terminology, but the damage is done. It's almost 0% chance she'll ever be able to have kids. Johanna Olsen Kennedy also wanted to give her a hysterectomy as a teenager. And that was, I think, the final straw that caused her to pull away from this doctor. But she's harmed for life. She's got a deeper voice. She's got hair. She just had actually reconstructive surgery. But, I mean, if she did ever have kids, which doesn't look like a possibility, she'd never be able to breastfeed. And this whole thing is just one of the greatest child abuse scandals ever. All because why? Because she'd been sexually abused. She wasn't looking forward to being a woman. And then some indoctrinated people who are supposed to be the most trusted members of society, the doctors and the teachers and the counselors and the therapists who she's also suing, all pushed her in this direction. And this is being done to hundreds of thousands of kids.
It's just I can feel your sort of anger as you're speaking, and I know exactly what you mean. Just as you get into it, it's almost impossible to avoid that feeling, just because it's such a betrayal of trust on so many levels for these kids. And I think you said something that really sort of stood out to me there. She wasn't looking forward to being a woman. I think I've heard that said, and this rings true to me, that for the most part, the guys who transition want to be women, but a lot of times the girls, they don't want to be men. They just don't want to be women. And if you really dig into that, as you said, almost every time you're going to find some story of sexual abuse in her past. And it's absolutely criminal to then take that and not even try to treat it, not try to talk about it, cut your breasts off, put you on testosterone. It's infuriating, and there's no other way to say it. There's the other thing you said, that anyone who's sort of in this debate for any amount of time will hear that saying all the time. Would you rather have a dead blank or a living blank? Insert, sex of child here. And you hear it so much from the detransitioners, and it's used as a way to manipulate the parents. It's used as a way to manipulate their parents who love their child. The vast majority of parents love their children, and they want them to be around, and they want them to be happy. And then to take that, and oftentimes these kids are not suicidal. They're being told that they're suicidal by the therapist, and the fact that you have that very specific sentence again and again across really the entire world, it makes it impossible to not imagine that there's some coordination, a sort of, how behind the scenes they're getting together and how can we best get the kids in, right? Basically, like a cult. There's no other way to describe it. And they're using the same tactics again and again and again.
Yeah, they're all in the same circles online, so they all use the same arguments. And I've heard all of these arguments a million times. And I can tell you what they're going to say every single conversation. And the one thing they will tell you every single time, and I'm not exaggerating, it's every single conversation, is that kids are going to die. Kids are going to kill themselves if we don't transition them. So what evidence is there for that? There's none. There is evidence to the contrary. We have pretty good studies with the adult population. There was a very comprehensive study in Sweden done with the adult population that showed suicides after adjusting for other mental health comorbidities. Suicides with the adult population about 10 years after sex reassignment surgery were 19.1 times higher than their peers. We have this big study with more than 100,000 that was just done, this Oxford study, showing that they're doing worse post-transition. But with kids, there weren't a lot of studies. Until last year, Finland came out with one. They looked at 24 years worth of data from 1996 to 2019. There were more than 2,000 kids who went to the gender clinic, and they compared the suicide rate there to a control group of almost 17,000 kids. Over the 24 years, there were 6 suicides at the gender clinic. Worked out to a 0.052 annualized percentage. 1 out of 2,000. This is no epidemic of suicides. Now, of course, every suicide is a tragedy. There was a slightly lower rate of actual suicides in the control group, but the common denominator between both groups was other mental health problems. It wasn't gender. It was other mental health issues. And then we had the Supreme Court case in December. So they were taking oral arguments in Skirmetti versus the DOJ. So this is the Tennessee ban on puberty blockers and cross-sex hormones versus the United States government under the Biden administration. So representing the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is now suing for the right to sterilize kids in every state where there's this ban. The lawyer is a woman named Chase Strangio. She says she's a man. And I forget which Supreme Court justice pinned her down on this, but she admitted before the Supreme Court that, oh, well, actually, when we discuss suicides, what we are really talking about is suicidal ideation. Mm-hmm. Completed suicides, she says, remain very low. So she just admitted in the Supreme Court, they've been lying for years and years and years to every single one of these parents in order to coerce them to going along with this. That type of person needs to be prosecuted. These doctors need to be prosecuted. The parents are lost and confused, and a lot of them are caught up in a cult. I don't think we should be prosecuting them all. What we should be doing is educating the entire population and reducing this cult of gender to ashes. We should then take those ashes, put them on one of Elon Musk's starships, and send them to the surface of the sun to be burned up. Because this ideology needs to be reduced to rubble, or else when we get the next leftist regime in power, they'll just bring it all back.
Yeah.
So I will say that I understand your point when it comes to the parents being coerced. Like I'll play devil's advocate. I still think that it falls on them because I don't like the word ignorance. If you're
100%.
you're not involved with your kids, it's on you. If you don't know what's going on at your kids' schools, it's on you. Nobody else can be blamed. But let's say that, you know what, I'll give them a pass because what you're saying is true. I know that what you're saying is absolutely correct. But here's a question I have for you, because you look at those doctors, you look at those psychologists, you look at those lawyers, like you just mentioned, they're outright lying. They have to know that what they're doing is wrong. They have to know this. So not only should they be held accountable, and by accountable, throw them in prison and throw away the key accountable. Why do you think they do it? Do you think that there's something else going on? There's a bigger agenda at play here that we don't want to address? Why do you think they do it?
Honestly, there's a lot of true believers in this. This is just like a cult. It's irrational, it's insane, but there are true believers. And I have a court case coming up in Australia because I I wrote this tweet about a woman who named Teddy Cook. She ran their LGBTQ organization down there. She says she's a man. And she's, of course, pushing all of this. And what we see all over the world with WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, it's run by a man who says he's a woman. Johanna Olsen-Kennedy, she's married to a woman who says she's a man. Chase Strangio at the ACLU, woman who says she's a man. At Kaiser Permanente, there's a woman who admitted on camera that they cut off the breasts of a 12-year-old girl. She's the psychologist at the gender clinic there. She's a woman who says she's a man. You have all these cult members now writing the policy, the health policy for all these kids and adults. And we expect them to write rational policy. They are the last people who should be involved in healthcare because they're all indoctrinated into this cult of harm. I almost called it a cult of death. It is that too in many respects. But these are a lot of true believers, to be honest with you, and they're not capable of acknowledging the truth. Now, yes, I would call this pure evil. That's what I think of this whole thing. But you do have these true believers, and they're the last people who should be involved. And you have people with psychiatric disorders writing healthcare policy for other people with the same psychiatric disorders. And that's exactly what I said about this woman in Australia. In Australia, they have a position in the government called the E-Safety Commissioner, whose job is to censor the internet, to protect Australians from people like me. So they ordered X to take down my post where I called this woman a woman, and I said what I just told you. People with psychiatric disorders are writing policy for people with psychiatric disorders. And so they tried to take down my post. X refused, but they geo-blocked it in Australia because they had to comply with the law. I then filed an appeal against the government. And then incredibly, Elon Musk also filed an appeal. So I've got a 5-day court case coming up at the end of the month, March 31st, April 4th, suing the government over this freedom of speech issue. But again, it's, Teddy Cook herself is lost. She's harmed herself. She's fully bought into this idea that she was supposed to be a man. When you talk to all these young women on the street who give me a hard time all the time, they've been through gender studies. Women's used to be called women's studies. Now it's called gender studies in university. They've all been indoctrinated for years into believing that children are born in the wrong body, that gender is a social construct, that your gender is just a feeling. Are they all evil? Of course not. These are 22-year-old girls. They're not all evil, but they're all indoctrinated. And they all firmly believe this, and they don't allow themselves to even look at the other side. So these are true believers. And if those young women get into these hospitals, into these gender clinics at children's hospitals, well, they're going to be pushing this because they think they're on the right side of history because they're totally lost and confused. And it's not just money behind all of this. There's a whole lot of true believers for sure. And I know I've mentioned women and feminism. It's not just that, of course. The feminists, the radical feminists who talk about this being due to porn sick males, they're also right. Because you get these men transitioning in middle age. They have a totally different situation going on. These are men with a sexual fetish called autogynephilia, where they get aroused by the idea of being a woman. They get aroused by the idea of entering women's spaces. They're mentally ill. They're evil. They're completely in the wrong. They're also pushing this. And we have NGOs pushing this. We have leftist governments pushing this. We have the Kamala Harrises of the world pushing this, just because that's what you have to do when you're in the Democratic Party. So it's coming from all sorts of directions, and there's not one answer for it all. But I think with the worst offenders, these doctors, these people like Johanna Olsen-Kennedy, we need to sue them civilly wherever we can. And that's happening now. That will cause the insurance companies to stop covering their procedures, and that'll put a stop to this. But we do need laws making this a criminal offense. We need to go after the biggest offenders because that'll stop everyone else in their tracks.
Yeah, you'd mentioned WPATH there, and I just wanted to sort of point out, in case our audience isn't quite sure, as Chris was talking about, this is essentially what you could think of as like the world governing body of gender healthcare, and it's got a very professional sounding name, a very medical sounding name. What I actually don't know. What was it? Does it stand for again, Chris?
It's the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. It used to be called the Harry Benjamin Society. And it's just a bunch of activists.
So,
That's
yeah,
all
sounds
it
super
is.
medical, right? You might think it's packed full of doctors. It's packed full of activists. There is no doctors, and they're the ones who
There
are
are some,
writing.
but yeah.
Yeah, they're for the most part, they're the ones that are writing the standards of care and the guidelines for how to treat trans kids. I saw a very interesting tweet thread a little while back where it showed how they're citing works from, say, the Pediatrics Association, but in that same work, the Pediatrics Association is citing from WPATH. So WPATH is saying this works because the pediatricians say so. The pediatrician is saying, look, WPATH says so, and it's just, there's no basis to it. It's all kabuki theater. It's all invented. And I just wanted to, I'm sure you knew this, but just in case sort of the audience wasn't quite clear, I want to point that out there. So I've got a quick question for you. And I also at the end wanted to give you a chance. I know you said you've got this court case coming up. I'm sure that's not cheap. If you do have a fundraiser or a way to plug that, please, by all means, I'd like to give you the chance to do that. But before that, my question is to you, what would you like to see in sort of a perfect world? For me, I kind of thought, you know what? I don't want to tell adults how to live. I thought anyone 25 and above, as long as, healthcare insurance is not paying for it, especially here in Canada, where we're essentially that comes from our dollars. But now I've heard the argument that it should just, you couldn't go to a doctor and say, I want to have my leg cut off because I don't like it. They would say, no, that's unethical for me to do that. And I'm open to that argument. I guess, what's your take on that? What would you like to see?
So there's a condition called apotemnophilia, which is where people think that their leg doesn't belong or their arm doesn't belong and they want to get it cut off. And there were a couple surgeons who actually did this, and then the medical associations put a stop to it. Because obviously, if someone wants their leg cut off, they have mental illness. You should not be cutting off their leg, Mr. Doctor, because you swore an oath to first do no harm. You don't solve mental health issues by cutting off body parts. If I was a doctor, I would never do this to anyone at any age. And the evidence all across the world shows that cutting off people's body parts, castrating them, inverting their penis to form a neovagina, this is not healthcare. So as far as I'm concerned, the medical bodies should put a stop to this. Doctors aren't order takers. They're supposed to be held to a higher standard. They're not someone sitting in a McDonald's drive-thru where I come through and I say, I'd like a Big Mac, please. And they go, here's your Big Mac. A 19-year-old girl should not be able to walk into Planned Parenthood, or 18, and say, I'd like testosterone, and walk out 20 minutes later with testosterone. She should not be able to make a telehealth appointment and schedule a double mastectomy over the internet in one appointment. That's not healthcare. And that's happening all over the place. So personally, I think they should put a stop to it. Now, you can't stop an adult from doing something to themselves, but let's not pretend this is healthcare. It's not. And I think doctors should be held to a higher standard. Of course, this should never be happening to children. It shouldn't be happening to 18, 19, 20-year-olds. I did all sorts of stupid things when I was 20 years old.
Yeah.
Now you got these kids with sexual abuse and trauma and bad histories and autism and whatever. And we're taking the children at their own word, at their own self-diagnosis, that they're going to be happier by sterilizing themselves. What do they know? Talk to most 20-year-old women who don't have all these other problems. And most of them will tell you they don't want to have kids. And then at 30, it's give me kids or give me a divorce.
Yeah.
Because as we spoke about earlier, their instincts kick in.
Mm-hmm.
We're all designed and have this instinctual need for family. And of course, not everyone's going to feel that way. But, any parent will tell you the greatest joy and love of their life is their children. I don't run into parents who say, I wish I never had kids. I run into them all the time who say, I wish I had more, myself included. And we're taking that away from these children. Our society's just gone so far away from how it's supposed to be. We have a lot of work to do, and I don't think they should be doing this to anyone.
Yeah.
You spoke about an article earlier. You did mention the Daily Mail, right? Is that not what we're talking about earlier? Because as you guys were talking, I was just doing some research, because I'll tag this in the notes of the video just so that
that's the one.
Yeah, I figured it because I was looking for the name of that woman here.
Oh, Jesus.
There she is. Yeah, my picture was right above there. Yeah.
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 Oh,
So bestiality, bondage, and drugs. And she was appointed to the World Health Organization to draft the policy. And is she a doctor? No, she's just an activist.
This is
So
the
anyway,
one
I'm
that-
going to have some fun down in Australia later this month. I'll be there almost a week early. I'm going to be in Sydney, I'm going to be in Brisbane and then Sydney and then Canberra and then Melbourne for the trial.
So are you going
I'll
to
be having some public events.
you're going to do work or just kind of like going there for activism and have a trial while you're down there kind of thing?
It's work. It's all business. I'll have some public speaking events. I'll be out on the street as well, doing my thing, going to some universities and doing a lot of media. I've got a bunch of media connections down there, but I've got some other people helping me to generate more media. So win or lose, it's a win. I can't lose because we're going to reach millions of people with the truth about this. I don't know about the judge. We've got this federal judge who's actually president of this administrative review tribunal. He's hearing the case. And within 1 minute of our first preliminary hearing last year, that was just a hearing setting forth dates to make submissions and things. Within 1 minute, he told my representative that we couldn't call Teddy Cook a woman. The whole point of the hearing and of the appeal is I should have the right to call her a woman.
Yes.
So I'm not going to make any compromises at all. I never will. I will just keep telling the truth. If they want to hold me in contempt of court, that's fine. They can put me in jail for a while and deport me. I don't care. That would honestly be the dumbest thing they could do because it would make international news.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it's going to happen. But we're going to have a great time. And I think we will win, to be honest with you. There was another win recently of a somewhat related case. But if we lose, we'll take it to the high court and generate even more media. So we're going to win no matter what.
Anything else you want to add? You want to put out there before we let you go?
Anything you want to plug?
I think it's important with language. I would like to discuss language just a little bit. We shouldn't call people trans.
Yeah.
Nobody is trans. As soon as you give up any of this language, you're lending legitimacy to this whole ideology. There is no such thing as a transgender person. There's no such thing as a transgender child. They're called girls and boys. The positive message is they're beautiful just as they are. We should never play the pronoun game. That is the gateway to this entire ideology, because now you're acknowledging that reality doesn't exist. You are admitting that the emperor who is naked is fully clothed. That's what you're doing. So just don't play along with any of this nonsense, because the whole thing is just based on lies. And so, I don't know, people just need to use their voice as they can, learn about this, try to be positive when you're talking about it, try to give the positive messages. That resonates a lot more than just negativity and complaining. And yeah, if people want to support me, that would be wonderful. That'd be extremely helpful. They can go to billboardchris.com and click on the donate button there and just have these conversations, because one conversation at a time, we're going to put a stop to this child abuse.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think you sort of hit the nail on the head there with language. There's a reason why they went for the language first and why they continue to harp so much on it. Like if you want to play a little mind game, every time you see an article where it discusses a trans quote unquote woman doing something, just turn it to man, see how it sounds in your head. And I'm just talking to any audience members who may be on the fence. You know, when they say like trans women banned from women's sports, yeah, maybe it kind of sounds a certain way. But if you just change it to say man banned from women's sports, it makes perfect sense. Who could
That's right.
Who could disagree with that, right? And so you see exactly why they've went so hard at language, and that is, I think you've correctly identified exactly that is the crux or the choke point for this entire ideology.
Yeah, you can say a man pretending to be a woman. That's entirely accurate. Or you could say a trans identifying male. We should never use the word woman in any respect to describe a man. There is nothing womanly about any man. They're all men. They can wear a dress. That's a man wearing a dress. There's no such thing as a trans woman. This language confuses so many people.
Yep.
People on the street, even today, They don't know if a trans woman is a woman or a man. They get all
And that's
confused. I
entirely
see it
intentional.
online all the time. People get so confused about the terminology. So just do what we've done for all of history. Call men men and call women women, and don't worry about what the haters are going to say.
Thank you so much for being here, Chris. It's been an excellent conversation. So, unfortunately, there was a little bit of technical difficulties with X, but hopefully we will get to have you back and do live, because we, like as Nico was saying earlier, the whole sort of a lot of the show is based on our audience engagement. Our audience is very engaged. They constantly ask questions, and I know they were really excited to have you on. So hopefully we can do that. But I just want to say thank you again. And Nico, was there anything you wanted to add there?
No, definitely enjoyed this conversation. I think I will invite you on my other podcast so we can dig into it more without risking being in trouble, because this show's normally broadcasted on YouTube and there's a lot of things I can't bring up because I know we're going to get shut down. I'm used to getting banned on social media, but I really enjoyed the conversation. I really enjoyed your time. I wish you all the best in Australia. I'm really curious.
We'll be
'cause you're
following
absolutely
that.
right. It's a win no matter what, but I like the fact that you're not worried about it, because that's exactly what we need. So good for you for doing what you're doing.
No, I love it. It's just fun.
Yeah.
We have the truth on our side, so all we have to do is say it. Like, they can say whatever they want. You get used to this after a while, and you stop worrying about what people say. So yeah, we're gonna keep winning. Thank you so much for having me, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.